I'll mute myself.
All righty. Hey, Aaron. Hey, Michael. Hey, Patty. Hey, Barbara. Hey, Lori. Scott's in the room, and Michael's in the room, and so is Alexandra, our regulars. Anybody that, so this session's going to be a little different than what we've done in the past. What we're going to do is we have two guests, Jeff Blizzard and Teresa Hubbard, and we're going to start with Jeff, and he's going to talk about some of the things that you need to think about, some legal aspects. He's not a lawyer, doesn't play one on TV. Teresa is, and her assistant Mike is here. She is a short slide deck to show us, and she's actually an agency owner, but she also helps agency owners and businesses with this. So let me do their bios real quick. Jeff has worked in the digital communications field for over 19 years, specializing in digital accessibility for the last 8 years. Jeff has worked in insurance, medical, and consulting industries, successfully implementing digital accessibility programs for large corporate environments such as State Farm Insurance and Optum Technologies. Jeff has a passion for the future of the digital world and equal access for all, regardless of ability. He has 25 years in IT industry, working on security, encryption, project management, web accessibility, document accessibility, and digital accessibility management. Welcome, Jeff. And I will introduce Teresa, and then we're going to start with Jeff. So Teresa started in the web industry back in 1999, like about the same time as a lot of us have. Worked as marketing director at taxspeaker.com for 8 years. She founded her agency Imagine Base LLC in 2012, and then started getadaaccessible.com. She's developed WordPress sites for a local agency in city of Jeff, and a number of school websites. Teresa and her team are trained in website accessibility and have also developed corporate accessible websites as well as other business websites. Welcome, Teresa. So Jeff, if you'd like to, just so everybody knows, Jeff's going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then Teresa's going to hop on for 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up as kind of a panel discussion. So people turn on your cameras and ask questions or post them in the chat, and we'll go from there. Jeff, take it away.
There we go. Perfect. Afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Blizzard. I am a digital accessibility manager for Optum Technologies, and Barry has asked me to talk a little bit about some of the challenges you may face regarding legal challenges to your digital content. What I typically call this presentation is accessibility. It's not just for government work, methods to prepare for litigation. Notice that in this, I don't say methods to avoid litigation or to avoid being sued, because that's not realistic. When we talk about digital accessibility, it's important to recognize that the Americans with Disabilities Act is covered under accessibility. So if you have a website, if it's publicly available, you potentially are a target. As Barry said, I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV because I'm not that good. So I stick with digital technology and tech work because that's more of my strong suit. I have some talking points I'm going to go through. So what is accessibility and why should I care? Well, accessibility is essentially making digital content accessible for people regardless of their ability. So regardless of whether they're blind, motor impaired, cognitively impaired, motor impaired, any of those things would stop somebody potentially from using a website or a PDF document or a video. And we need to be aware of that. We need to make the content as available for them as it is for somebody who may not have a disability. The other thing is, quite frankly, it helps your SEO. Good coding practices never hurts anybody's SEO, and let's face it, we're all looking for more positive SEO results. One additional thing is it provides a wider audience and more inclusive customer relationships. People say, well, you know, I'm an insurance company. I don't sell insurance to blind people. Well, how do you know that? There are blind people who they own vehicles. They may not drive them, but they own them, and their caregivers maybe need insurance. When we look at blind folks who may be head of household, they don't necessarily drive, they don't necessarily go out and do things like you and I may, but they are people who have money, they make money, they spend money, and why shouldn't they do it with you? And the third and final point is, quite frankly, it's actually the law. Again, if you have a website that's publicly available, you potentially are a target, and this is something you need to be aware of. Some folks are not aware that the ADA does cover private websites. It's no different than if you opened up a store at the mall and you decided you didn't want to put in a wheelchair accessible ramp, or you didn't want to make the doors wheelchair accessible, or the restroom. You could be sued. It is an accommodation and it is legally required. So again, when I talk about the ADA, it's not just for government work. So if you are a private entity, it's important to understand the ADA and the fact that you need your digital content. And when I talk about digital content, I'm not just talking about websites. I'm talking about video. I'm talking about PDF documents or Word documents you may put up there. These are all items that need to be made accessible for people with disabilities. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, people who may be blind or may have a motor impairment or low vision, they use something called assistive technology or a screen reader. Their screen reader must parse your website. It must parse your PDF documents. It must interpret transcripts from a video. And it's important that the information is set properly so that these folks can actually get this information no differently than you or I would. So again, we need equal access to the information, regardless of ability or disability. So some of the legal action that's been taken, some that come to mind: E-Trade, they were sued. Bank of America was sued. Massachusetts Eye and Ear sued. The Motley Fool, Weight Watchers, and for those of us down in the Tampa area, Island Comfort and Footwear was recently sued. And I believe that they are considering going out of business because of that lawsuit and the cost that it would take to actually, for such a small company to go ahead and remediate and make their content as accessible as it's been requested. So just something to think about. In 2018, there was a woman who sued 175 business owners because of their website accessibility in Florida alone. In 2018, there were 2,285 ADA lawsuits filed in the federal court across the nation. This is an increase of 181% from 2017. So digital accessibility and digital equitability is now being brought forth through suits. Folks who have disabilities are tired of being put to the back. They want the attention on what they need. And in reality, it's only fair. So what can you do? I mean, I can imagine if somebody's talking to you about being sued and, oh my God, it's going to be so expensive, not that big of a deal. Let's talk through this. So the first thing you want to do is you want to educate yourself and your company, right? You want to make sure that you know what could potentially happen. Don't stick your head in the sand. That's the absolute worst thing you can do. You want to engage with customers who need assistance. Don't run from them. That is the absolute horrible thing to do. I can tell you right now, there are several large companies, insurance companies, that initially tried to work with some folks who were blind in trying to get them through to process claims or to pay a bill. And they either got frustrated, the company did, or they kind of fell through the cracks. These people fell through the cracks. And the problem was the people got so frustrated after about the 50th time trying to get in touch with this company, they said, you know what, I'm just going to sue. More often than not, you can resolve a situation by engaging with these folks, trying to help them, showing them that you actually care about their needs. And they're more often than not, they're willing to just go with that and understand that you're going to make the site accessible down the road. Another important thing, make sure that your legal counsel has knowledge and background on digital accessibility. Critical. I have actually heard lawyers say, well, that's not that big of a deal. It's an ADA thing. It is a big deal. And it will be a very big deal if for some reason a lawyer comes knocking on your door. A lot of companies, universities, and smaller companies I know of have actually received what's called a demand letter from attorneys. So what happens is an attorney goes out, they purchase a scanning tool, and they run it against your publicly available website. They find all these defects, and they say, aha, I want you to pay me because I found 5 of these defects, and it's not accessible because of these 5 defects, so you owe me money. Be very careful not to just decide to settle because there's another lawyer behind him who's probably willing to do the same thing and get some more of your money. It's always better to make the content accessible. An accessibility statement is key. You want to make sure that your website has an accessibility statement, that you've worked with your lawyer to write up a solid accessibility statement. You may not be accessible now. Maybe your lawyer says, fine, go ahead and put that down. Say, we're working towards the digital accessibility. Here's our plan. Whatever your lawyer thinks is the appropriate verbiage in the statement, make sure you have that on all of your footers. So when I was talking to Barry, he said, can you provide some resources? And there's one resource that I think above anything else that I can throw out there. It's from a lawyer, of all people, named Laney Feingold. And it's called Structured Settlements. Laney is one of the premier lawyers who has headed up these E-Trade, Target, all these other companies and had these lawsuits. She's very big into structured settlements. I think it's important if you read the book, you'll have a good understanding of her approach and how potentially to mitigate any kind of legal action that may come your way. Now, for those of you that actually want tools for your desktop, there's something called the DQAxe plugin. It's a web browser plugin. So what you do is you install this, you click a button, and it runs an analysis on the web page, and it gives you the results. And it gives you actionable information that you can use to remediate the site. There's something else called the Web Accessibility Toolbar or the WAT toolbar. I believe that's from the Paciello Group. Another great tool to use. And then for those of you who are looking to get training for your customers or for your teams, you want to look at either DQ Systems has DQ University, or the Paciello Group has training modules as well that you can subscribe to. Again, this is not something to run from or be fearful of. This is no different than when we went from COBOL to C++, right? It's just another way of learning how to do things on the web. So this should be, if anything, exciting, because this could be another revenue stream for you as well, if your teams learn it as well as they should. And with that, I'm done, Barry.
Awesome, Jeff. I put the resources in the chat for everyone to check out. We will share them out to Facebook and other places as well. That was awesome, Jeff. And you just spurred a whole bunch of questions that I'll have after Teresa does her bit here. So Teresa and Mike, you're on.
Okay, go ahead, Teresa. You're on mute.
Here we go. Hey, everyone. I know some of you guys from before. I think we're gonna overlap probably a little bit of what Jeff just said, but with accessibility on websites, like Jeff was saying, you've got all kinds of people with different issues that they need to be able to access a website. Like, for instance, anyone who is wearing glasses, they're using an accessible assistive technology. But a lot of times what we're finding with agencies that we work with are people who, who are using screen readers, and they're not able to either fill a form, do a reservation. And the reason for that is there's errors on the website. And what an error as far as accessibility is, errors, it can include things like headings not being in order, forms not being tagged properly, ARIA tags not being on a website. And then those are you can download some free tools, which we'll put those in the resources too, where you can check a website for the errors. Wordings and notices, those have to be manually checked. So there's a lot of plugins, a lot of overlays that do not check the warnings and notices. And the only way those can be checked is by doing a manual audit of the website. Our auditors do a manual audit just like they were, you know, like a handicapped person would use. So we use a JAWS screen reader, and going through a website with a JAWS screen reader, we test a site just like they would with the eyes closed kind of thing. We don't close our eyes, but the JAWS, we can tell that if you can get to the body content. We had somebody who had like hundreds of links on the side of a website. You had to go through all 100 and something links before you could get to the body content. So the plugins and things like that do not test that, and it wouldn't show it. And like Jeff was saying, documents and videos must be accessible as well, which there's some training that we can give you a link to for documents. So when we go through a website for accessibility, what we'll do is an automated and a manual audit. We prepare an accessibility report showing what the issues are and how they're fixed, and then we either give that to the developer, you, or we remediate it in the same way with PDFs, and then we'll do a follow-up audit just to ensure that a website is done properly and is accessible. With Section 508, which is separate from ADA, you have two different laws. You have ADA and you have the Rehabilitation Act. ADA covers everyone. Everyone who offers any service, any product is covered under ADA. Section 504, 508 of the Rehabilitation Act is for government agencies and schools. If they aren't under the 508, then they fall under ADA. But 508 has something called a VPAT report, and this report can be created and given to either one of them, either ADA or rehabilitation. And what that is a time, and when we say the website is accessible, and it's like an auditor's report. It'll go down through all the issues and show how you're taking care of that. A lot of lawsuits that have been filed, what they need to prove in a court of law that their website is accessible is a VPAT report. And so that's why we offer that. There's scanning tools and other programs out there that you can continually monitor a website to ensure that as your updates and your changes on a website hasn't pushed you out of being accessible. And again, this goes through, there's several things that are needed, but this is just a snippet and overview of what to look for when you're building a website so that it's accessible. You'll want to make sure, first of all, you have one H1 tag on the page, and then after your H1, all of your tags need to go in order. So you'd go H2, H3, H4, and make sure, because a screen reader, that's how a screen reader hops down a page. So if you go from an H2 to an H4 back to an H2, the screen reader doesn't work properly on the website. Your images, they need to have alt tags. It's not only good for accessibility, but also for SEO. But the alt tags need to be descriptive of the image, unless it's decorative. A decorative image doesn't give any needed information for, say, a link. If you've got an image and you talk about something, you don't have to put an alt tag on there. You can just say it's decorative. The links, you want to be very careful, and this is really prevalent everywhere, but like on a button, click more, read here. The blind person using a screen reader, what they'll read is, it'll just say, click here. But what you want it to say is, click here for details about whatever your product is. And then the title field for each link, you need to put a title in. Tables, they have to be coded properly so that a screen reader can go across a column or a row. If you think about a person using a screen reader, what they're using is they're using their arrow keys to tab, and their tab keys to tab through a website. They don't use a mouse, but they use their keyboard. So it's really important that as they use their up and down arrows or the back and forth arrows, that things are coded properly so that it'll work right. The videos, you can use, they have to have closed caption on them, or you can provide a transcription. Those are for people, of course, the closed captioning is for people who are hearing impaired, like myself. If they don't have closed caption, most of the time I can't hear a video. You know, I do have assistive technology that helps me out, but closed captioning is required to be at the AA level for WCAG. And the same way with color contrast. The color contrast is for people with low vision, or and they have a way to turn the color contrast off and on, but it has to be at a ratio of 4.5 to 1. And there's tools, again, to be able to ascertain if you're in that level, and we can share those with you. Rather than using absolute text sizes on a website, so you, instead of using 14px, using EM, and that way the website can be made bigger up to 200 times, which is a very minimum according to WCAG. So a person with low vision, not blind, but say they're low vision, they will zoom into a website to read, you know, one sentence might take up the whole monitor for them. And so you want to be able to have the website to be able to be zoomed up to 200% without breaking the structure. Okay. So when the best place to start with accessibility, of course, is to start considering those as you're designing them. Think about the color contrast. Don't let color be the only way that things are noted. Say a link that changes color, you need to have focus on that link, whether it be a border around it when you hover over it, or an underline. The background images, if you have text on top of those are an issue with people with accessibility issues. And your hover over the mouse, you know, if it is only color, you have to have more than color, again, just to focus around that. You avoid putting things on top of images. And the UX for people, if you go through the WCAG standards, you should, you'll understand what they're saying as far as how to do them. There's training, there's companies. Developers, they should start with the structure of their HTML. A lot of companies, if you've got, say you have, I don't know what kind of clients you work with, but say you have a client who doesn't have the budget for accessibility, perhaps you think about creating a theme or having a theme created that has accessibility built into it to help reduce the cost. It's not only, lawsuits are the big thing. The lawsuits are the thing that pushes people to do something. But I like to think it's the right thing to do as well. And I think that comes from being, you know, having a hearing issue and knowing the frustrations out of that. And your skip nav links, those need to be put in. And if you're a developer, I'm sure you understand what these are. You don't want empty links. Those will throw errors. And your forms and everything has to be accessible as well. I went to WebAIM in Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, it's Logan, Utah. I spent 4 days in their training, and then, you know, I've spent time back and forth. After that, they have some resources for you. If you can do that training, it's a great, great training if you're wanting to really get into accessibility. I think it's $8.95 or something like that. It's a really good training. If you can't go there and you have a team large enough, they do have teams that can come to your place for your developers. And we'll share these links with you. They also have a document training that is excellent for documents. PDFs, when you create those, there's a method right there. There's a method for doing that with Adobe DC, and it has to follow your PDFs need to follow the same type of heading structure. Your images all have to have alt tags on them. All the things that you're doing on a website, your PDFs need to follow a same situation. So that's what that training will teach you how to do. And there's other things, other places on the web that you could do training. Lynda.com, Udemy, all of those have training. I would just say, take a course, take a course online if you can't travel to Utah. Familiarize yourself with accessibility and get into the habit of thinking accessibility as you're developing a website. Yeah, that's about us. There is an association called the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. We're a member of it, but they have some great resources on their website. WebAIM is the top authority in accessibility. We're on the referral list, and they're very, very good about helping with questions. They do audits. I think the last time we checked with them, they weren't taking any more clients. They're so busy. But there's a couple of really good resources for them. And accessibility, it does give independence to everyone. If I go to a website where someone's trying to sell me something and all that's on there is a video with no closed caption, if you think about it, it leaves out a huge part of their audience, a huge portion of sales that they're losing. And it's frustrating for people who, with an accessibility issue. So I think that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and thank you very much, Jeff. I guess there's people that may have some questions, so we'll open it up to the room first. And I know Barry's got some questions as well, but he's busy putting links in at the moment. Excuse me. From what I have understood from both of the presentations, there's some simple things that we can all do that are traditionally best practices anyway, but a little bit of knowledge can make a huge difference just to start getting compliant, to start that process. For example, the whole thing about the H1 tags. So I know myself, I've been very lazy with those because I haven't considered the accessibility purpose of the tags. So some of it is just, understanding something really as basic as that can make a big difference to how a screen reader works.
Jeff, and I have a question for both of you, and as far as Ursa's from Australia, we have UK members, Aaron's from Canada. What do they need to look at? Because ADA is US law, okay? And I don't know what they have in their countries, but I'm sure there's got to be something similar, so they need to think about it the same way.
He's muted.
There we go. So yeah, Canada, Ontario actually has a law called AODA, Ontarians with Disabilities Act. AODA requires companies that have 50 or more people
Videos
to
have
be WCAG, AA.
We this one us. Yeah, some of it's us that we don't drill down, and yeah. Ugh. Why am I listening to that?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say WCAG, AA compliant. They're pretty strict about it. That's one of the things we had to do at State Farm. is they have a presence in Canada, so they had to become Canadian compliant. I know Europe also has pretty strict regulations. I don't know the specific regulations, but they definitely have some very strict regulations regarding audio, video, and digital content. So if you meet with CAG 20 Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 20 AA standards, 99% of the time you are going to be compliant with either European, American, Canadian laws. Does that answer the question, Barry?
Yeah, sure. That sure does.
Okay.
That's right.
But
It's almost, sorry.
I was just going to say, I just put a link into the WCAG 2.1. Those are the standards that are international. So it's not that, you know, a different country has different standards. There's laws, different laws, but the WCAG is a worldwide consortium of accessibility experts that came together, and they have created the WCAG 2.0, now 2.1, which also encompasses mobile. So I just put a link to that, and someone had asked me, Alexandria asked me about developers, or asked about developers. The WCAG is the place to look at to get started with accessibility, to go through all of those standards that's needed.
Yeah, and Barry has a copy of our slides that he can share after the meeting.
Okay, if that's okay, I'll share those out on the Facebook group.
And they have all the links in there
Okay.
to what we talked about.
So Patty has a question. Did you want to read those, Barry? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll read it. As a web designer, what is our liability when it comes to compliance? Are there contracts for web designers to alleviate liability?
So who would you like
As
to?
far as, I think that's something for Jeff. We carry insurance for that reason.
So I would say it depends on the scope of your contract. If it's in your contract from an agency standpoint, and if you're a third-party developer for that agency, and it's something you've agreed to, then you could be on the hook for the remediation costs at a minimum. And I would strongly recommend insurance. And I'd also recommend, if you are a third-party developer contracting to an agency, that you speak with legal counsel and see what their recommendation is, how to mitigate your exposure.
So let me ask you this. I hope I didn't step on somebody. In that case, so could we write a proposal and say, look, this is a recommendation that we make, and they have to have the client sign off, yes, I want this, or no, I don't want this, because there's a lot of work that goes into it? Or is it better just to make it part of the proposal, and that's what it is?
So in my opinion, there's two sides to this, right? There's the right thing to do, which is all digital content should be accessible for everybody. That's why it's there. So from my own personal perspective, I would make sure that it's just part of the proposal, and that's just how we're going to do business. Not everybody has the expertise, has the resources to actually do that. So in some cases, they may opt to take a different route. I don't think that would be the best route to go, because again, you open yourself up to a lot of exposure.
So,
But you know, oh, sorry.
go ahead, Teresa. Go ahead.
What we've recommended, like to agency owners who've come to us, how can they handle ADA with their clients, and what they're trying to do is offer another service. We have suggested making that a line item. It's a service to your clients. One, you're helping them CYA, so when they happen, if they do get a letter of intent, or if they do get sued, before that happens, to make them aware that, do you know there's accessibility laws that cover websites, just like your parking lot and your bathrooms and all that stuff. Your website falls underneath this too. We can give you a quote on that, or we work with a partner, or we just want to make you aware. You become an asset to them by making them aware, instead of waiting for them to be sitting ducks, like Jeff was saying, and they get sued, and then they come back to you. Did you know anything about this? You know, most times agencies really aren't familiar unless they've had a client who's had a lawsuit.
So Teresa,
Yeah, can I add a little something to that?
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, we've been talking with agency owners. They kind of fall into two camps, two that are aware of the issue and proactive, and then the others that it's just new to them, that for some reason it's come up. Maybe one of their clients has mentioned it to them. So in the first group, what we're seeing that some of the, I guess the agencies are trying to get ahead of the curve. They're starting to require their development team to build the initial website accessible. Our lead developer, he recommends getting the code right when you build the website, because remediation of the code is one of the more expensive things to accomplish. If it's built correctly from the start, then you don't have those costs in the future. And so some of this is, I would liken it to where responsive design was, say, 5 or 6 years ago. People were building separate mobile websites, not really building responsive sites. But now that's the normal set of development, and accessibility is starting to become a new standard. And so the sooner as you build new websites, you start building to that standard, the better protected your customers are. The second group I mentioned were agency owners that really didn't have a lot of awareness around accessibility. And so they're contacting us, and many of them have this feeling that if they bring the issue up to their client, it reflects badly on the website that they built. And really, it's an area that it just has to be admitted that this is a standard that's becoming prevalent and necessary. And you know, we're wanting to make our clients aware of it. But yes, there is a cost to test and remediate a website, and we found sometimes that cost can be more than what they paid to build the original website. And you know, so it becomes a bit of a difficult issue sometimes in client conversations because of that.
Yeah.
Actually,
yeah.
that was going to be
I
one
think-
of my.
I see a question. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was going to ask, once you are really familiar with all the best practices, what the best practices are when you're building a site from the ground up, what percentage would you say of a site build isn't additional work, but just work done the right way, as opposed to additional work that's required? If that makes sense.
You mean like what's the difference in creating an accessible site and not creating, and how much more extra time would it take to do that?
That's right. If you're assuming that all the best practices are followed at the beginning.
It's along the lines of, when's it least expensive to do anything? The least expensive place to decide things is in the initial discussions on how you're going to approach something. Then the next step is, did you build a design that's accessible? That's the least expensive place to do it. The next step, when you make the code up the original website, just having those standards in place. For example, if you are working with a white label agency as your developer team, require that as a standard that they need to provide for you as part of building a site. That helps you a great deal. But the most expensive time to fix anything is after the website's live and you have to go back in and fix it. So it's just really along a continuum. I'm not sure percentage-wise, it's like anything. If you're practicing good coding, say you've set up frameworks, your developers set up frameworks that they reuse, make those frameworks accessible so that you invest in that once, and then going forward, it's there in the framework. You just have to make sure you don't break it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and any new content you put on, you know, you follow the same guidelines. So if you're adding new images, make sure you put in the alt tags. If you're adding different menus, just make sure you have the skip links in the menus. Once you are working with a developer who's familiar, or if you're the developer, are familiar with ARIA code and with making things accessible, it should be a pretty easy process. The one thing that I would caution, though, is not to feel like if you make a template that's accessible and you put a new site on it, as far as saying your website's accessible without doing any kind of an audit, I'd be very cautious in telling a client that. Barry, I saw a question up higher that I'd like to address, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I see. Can you discuss userway.org and similar tools? So we tested userway.org, actually. There's a university that's using this, and we set in on a call with a client. And so after our test, the website failed for accessibility. And I reached out to Jared at WebAIM, and I said, Jared, we tested this university's website. They're using userway.org, and we've seen plugins, and we've seen other ones like userway.org. And, you know, the WebAIM, like I said, they're the authority everywhere. What's your feelings on these plugins and overlays? And he emailed back to say that one of his colleagues called them, he's a disabled person, and he called them bullshit in his terms. He said, just make the website accessible. And Jared mentioned also that there's actually accessibility issues within these plugins. So a person who's blind or in using a screen reader or low vision, they have to find that first to be able to turn it on. So I would just use caution if you're thinking about, you know, that's a cheap way to do it. It really isn't. I think Jared called it snake oil, expensive snake oil on those. So I don't want to be disparaging, but I do want you all as agency owners, fellow agency owners, to just be cautious what you're showing your client.
We've also seen examples and been asked about companies that have implemented accessible versions of the website. So they've got their public site and then a button you click that takes you over to the accessible version. And it, in many ways, it starts to put you into a dual maintenance mode. There's high potential that the experience on the accessible site is going to be somewhat less than the experience on the main site, just because they've maybe, to make it accessible, they've dumbed it down a lot, maybe skipped some content, and it's really not making your website accessible. It's giving all the people with disabilities a lesser experience on the web, and and serving that up to them. And so they may or may not know what they do and don't get because of that. So that's just another approach that's out there, and let you guys know about it.
So if I could also interject with that line of thought, there was recently a lawsuit with a company that said, fine, I'll make an accessible version. And they thought that was good enough, and they got sued. And it was determined by the court that it was not equitable, it was not accessible, it was not what the ADA intends. Therefore, creating a separate site does not make your site accessible. One, you're asking these folks to self-identify as being accessible through their MAC address. So that's a problem. It should not matter their ability or disability. They should have equal access. And that's what the court found. So the company actually had to go back, and after they created this accessible portal, now they had to go back and remediate their original site. So the expense can be huge. And I agree 100% with everybody on this call. If you're going to do accessibility, do it from the beginning, do it up front, do it right, because to do it in the back end is going to cost you a lot more money.
Got a question here that I have, and then we'll get to Michael's question. Are there, a lot of us use WordPress and other platforms. Are certain platforms already set up in such a way that they're ADA compliant, where when you're putting, when you're using a content management system, it automatically puts in the correct code? And then on the flip side of that, if you're using like WordPress, where you can go out and purchase some really awesome themes out there, can you get those that are ADA compliant? Does it even exist, or is it best to just start out and build from scratch? Because I know a lot of us are starting with, some of us are starting with a theme and building on that and building some really awesome sites.
I guess to our knowledge, there's not a lot in the WordPress world that's accessible at the start. And also in WordPress, you've got the world of plugins, which can cause difficulties. Some plugins can be made accessible because they give you the ability to, say, customize code without impacting the plugin, but others may not have even thought of it, and you really can't modify the plugin directly because then you lose the ability to apply updates to it. So it's really case by case when it comes to plugins. Accessible themes, once again, we're not aware of themes that are out there that are start you out as accessible. Some are probably better than others. And when it comes to other types of site builders and such, I've been in some of the forums, and whenever accessibility comes up, it's not really a welcome topic. So a lot of these companies are not paying attention to it yet. But the agency owners are starting to raise concerns with the site builder companies that they need accessibility because it's starting to become more of an issue that people are hearing about.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Jeff, I'm going to ask this question because Jeff and I spoke before this, and I asked him this. I said, is there a minimum that we can meet? And Jeff said,
Yes. It's a little bit different than what I told you before.
Oh, okay.
The minimum you can meet is to make your site accessible, period. So if you're looking for a quick checklist, if you're looking for the minimal that I actually have to do to just pass that threshold, I'm going to tell you no, it doesn't exist. The site needs to be accessible, because what you may do for somebody who has a visual disability may not work for somebody who has a motor disability, may not work for somebody who has an auditory disability. The site needs to be accessible. They're not going to rate you, you're 50% accessible to WCAG 2.0 AA or 2.1 AA. They're not going to say that. They're going to say you pass or you fail. It's a very binary decision. Now, the reports that are given will identify where you've not hit the mark, and that's where you can go and fix those things. But they're not going to say, well, you're kind of 80% accessible, so we're kind of going to give you, no. Most of the reports I've seen are very binary. You pass, you fail, and then they give you results.
Gotcha. And one thing that leads me to this about the ADA that I posted in the group, and because it was out of a Forbes article, and it said, as written, the ADA law requires no notice before a lawsuit is filed against a company for noncompliance. The law provides no time for the company to take action before the lawsuit is filed, and it offers no defense to a company after the lawsuit is filed. So that's pretty scary.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So, Teresa.
And if I could just add one thing to the YouTube discussions going on in the chat, there's a Scooby-Doo captioned or something captioned YouTube video where it's a very serious video, but towards the middle of the video, the auto captioning from YouTube kind of makes it sound like a Scooby-Doo reference. It just goes all over the place. So be very aware of YouTube auto captioning. Very afraid.
I use closed captions on my phone, and it was funny. I was on a phone with a client and watching my closed captions, and it come up something about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I was like, what? But that's what happens with YouTube as well. So
Yeah.
I put a link to a company that will do, they refer to YouTube captioning as actually craptions. I put scraptions, but it's craptions is what she used. But they will caption those out. But Barry, back to your comment, what we're hearing on people getting sued is they are not getting, most of the time, either they're just getting notices of they've been sued. And then they're scrambling, trying to find somebody to remediate, or their attorneys calling us trying to find somebody if we can help them. They either settle, and part of the settlement is always they will make their website accessible. So they end up paying the attorney fee. There's some of them that have got damages. Plus, they also have to spend the money to have their website audited and remediated. We have several of those going right now, and it's not any fun to be under the gun. You know, they have until this time to have an accessible website. So if you do it in advance, you reduce the stress for your client as well.
Well, thank you. Penny has a question in here. How do you document that a site is compliant at the point when it is launched to cover in case the client doesn't use the elements you build into it, help them keep new content compliant? Because I could see clients adding images and forgetting to add an alt tag. Just as simple as that.
So as was pointed out earlier, a VPAT, you know, if you had a VPAT written up after an assessment was done on your site before it goes live, the VPAT would serve as a point in time indication, verification that the site was accessible when it went live. Now, the minute you introduce new code into that environment, that VPAT may or may not still be valid depending on what you introduced into the environment.
I'm being ignorant here. What's a VPAT?
A VPAT is basically a statement that says that you've had an assessment done, that the site has been deemed accessible. It is letting people know that you've actually had the work done. You're not just making this up.
Gotcha.
Who provides that statement? Where does that come from? Is that an authority of some kind?
Well, this would come from any number of vendors that, you know, do digital accessibility work. They provide VPATs as, you know, they can provide it as a service. They can provide it as a contract as part of an ongoing service. So, and I believe.
So perhaps that's something that we also need to let our clients know when we're making a website live as part of our training. So at the moment, a lot of our training might involve, you know, how to edit, how to add things. And that's an additional element that we need to start including in our training of clients.
Right.
Yes, anyone who provides content and, you know, updates content on the website should be trained in accessibility so they maintain it. And anyone who makes documents, the WebAIM training for documents is, I think, $125, and it's it's an online training, so it's fairly inexpensive to send any document creator through that training so they can be certain they're creating accessible documents that get put up on the web. We get contacted by companies that have hundreds, if not thousands, of documents on the web, and they're not accessible. It gets to be very expensive to fix. And the first place we start is train all your content. You know, everyone who produces content, put them through the training so that they don't make any more work for you.
I can attest to it being expensive. Working with United Health Group, we have hundreds of thousands of documents we have to remediate, and my team actually does bulk remediation. In the last 2 years, we've spent about $6 million just on PDF remediation.
Wow, that's huge. Let's see here. Bill Scholler had a question. And by the way, if anybody wants to chat, let me know. For some reason, you can't unmute yourself. I can unmute people. I don't know why you can't. But anyway, because I unmuted Penny there because I thought she was trying to talk. Let's see here. Bill says, seems a bit like ADA WCAG is the tool that will drive out the amateur web people as well as the client-enabled sites as a viable option. And I'll add to that because I was watching the video about the shoe store in Florida, and he says, this is just a $65 a month website. And he probably built it himself, and now he's in trouble. So as agency owners, we have to think about how we keep our clients out of trouble, you know, and talk to them about it.
And I think it's important.
The other thing you got to, go ahead, Joe.
No, please.
Oh, I was going to say the other thing that just come to mind. Another thing to think about is third-party applications that you connect to the website as well. The reservation booking engines, any kind of a appointment thing, or if you've got a third-party checkout. You know, those, if they're on their website and it's going to that third party, it's part of your website. We had that with the school system is what brought that up, but teachers were using Wix and different websites. Like Barry was $30 website, or they did it themselves. So the teachers were making their own school or their own class websites, but it was linked off of the school's website. We had to nix all of those and said you can't do that anymore, because if a student in her class would go to this Wix site, the school would be responsible, because the student with a disability that went to her website to get her homework and couldn't get it because of whatever their disability, the school was liable for that.
Cool. That's and that I'm going to ask Patty's question next, but I that goes along with for the WordPress folks out there. If you build a WordPress site and it's compliant, all the plugins are, but then the client goes in there and adds, oh, this is a cool plugin, I want to make it do this, and it's not, and it suddenly makes the website non-compliant, then they have a problem. But anyways, Patty says, have you heard of the tax credit to remediate your site? This link allows you to recoup half of your money, up to $5,000. That is, that just moved on me, spent making your website ADA compliant, and it's on ada.gov. So check out that link. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I've not heard of that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I have not heard of that. It looks like it's a tax credit. Have you heard of it, Jeff?
I've not, no.
That would be cool if that's a tax credit even. So that's something that we can talk to our customers about once we research it fully. Yeah. But
we'll look at that.
Yeah, check it out. And then what, Teresa?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just said, yeah, that would be great for your clients if that works, that tax credit.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm currently going through with a client that has a government site, as a government agency, and they've been asked by the end of the year to be compliant. So I'm not as familiar with it. So I reached out to an agency that does ADA compliance, and he gave me this link to the credit. But there are some little key factors that you've mentioned in your presentations today that he didn't mention. So I'm not, on the hook with him yet. So I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit more. Again, talking about all of this compliance, it's really imperative that we have something in our proposals that get us off the hook if need be. I mean, this is intense.
I think it is intense, and I think the biggest thing, Patty, is I like the part where we can put a separate line item and say, hey, to be fully compliant, it'll add this much, and let them opt out of it or opt in, and then that's a checkbox. But my biggest concern, and one of the biggest struggles that BC owners in the room are having, is just going back to clients. Business Catalyst, Jeff and Teresa, if you don't know, got end of life. And we have to move these sites and either migrate them or rebuild them. But now we're coming at them with another thing that we have to talk to them about. And it's hard enough telling them, hey, our platform that we told you was awesome is shutting down. Now we have to talk about this. It's tough. It makes me want to, I'm going to retire on Friday. So is Laura. We're retiring on Friday. So
I think I was thinking that in a way this might be something positive that we could introduce to say, look, you're going to need to be compliant anyway. So while we're migrating or move, if we put a different spin on it, then it becomes something of value, because at the moment I'm having real trouble justifying to clients why they have to pay X, Y, Z to get exactly what they've got right now. Whereas if we put that in a way of saying, what you're actually going to get is an accessibility compliant website, then at least they can understand the additional value that they're getting.
Mm-hmm.
That and much better SEO. I mean, those are two key things to take away from this. Yes, there is a cost associated. There's also a cost associated with driving up your SEO. I mean, people pay thousands of dollars a month to do it. So this is one, it's the right thing. It's a human thing. And two, ultimately it helps them.
Yeah, we talked to an agency owner the other day. He reached out to us, and they want to add to their line that they develop accessible websites. That's an opportunity for them. They are not doing the development, but they wanted to partner with us, so that gives them an edge on other developers. You know, they have that, they can say we develop compliant ADA, and they're just putting that as a line item. And of course, working with us as a partner. So that's, yeah.
And I would reference all agency owners, if you're going to go with an accessibility firm, get references. Don't just, because one of the individuals, and I apologize, I forget the name, but she mentioned that she's going through the government site right now, and that, you know, she's talking to these people. Make sure they send you references. Make sure they send you successful references that you can talk to, because there are a lot out there, and some are better than others, but you want to make sure that you can get the best company out there representing you and doing the assessments for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, Patty asked that question. Michael Collins asked the question up in the chat farther, and I went right by it. So some of the questions that have been in the chat is about liability, insurance, and it says, are there some insurance carriers that are more tuned into professional liability, and then other terms of digital accessibility liability issues? Teresa put in Hiscox, I'm pronouncing that right. They're a company I've seen.
That's insurance.
Yeah, so commercial insurance, I've had E&O forever. It's just the right thing to do, to have that to protect your liability. Doesn't do everything. You need to have, business insurance, business liability, and E&O, and it adds up.
You'll want to ask your agent or your underwriter specifically if you're covered. Just make sure it's there.
Right.
And I don't know if Lloyd's of London, I mean, they typically do some pretty off-the-wall insurance. You may want to look at them as well. They may have something specific. I don't know, but they're known for doing some pretty off-the-wall insurance coverage.
Well, so there's been a number, Alexandra asked again, and other people have asked about DUTA. There's a platform out a lot of us BC partners have transitioned to, and other people in the industry, it's called DUTA. There's thousands of websites on that platform, and I can't answer that. I know Bill, I don't think Bill's still in the room. Schiller, he's got like 70 sites over there now, so I sure hope it is. What's the yup, Bill?
There's really no way to tell. I mean, if every website is developed differently on DUTA, if you put elements in there that's not accessible, so you put some graphics on, you put a video on with no closed captioning, you put a link to a third party that's not accessible, and a form. I don't know what DUTA uses, but if you put a form on that doesn't have the capability for a screen reader to use, then all of a sudden your website's not accessible. It doesn't matter what platform it's on. It could be Wix, it could be DUTA, it could be any of those. But there's not a platform that I'm aware of that's 100% accessible just out of the box. There's not a theme either. We found one or two, but even those themes had to have some issues, had to have some errors fixed.
Right. So as far as development, I have a dev team I use. Do you recommend that because I asked them about ADA accessibility and they said they can work toward it, but they can't guarantee anything. Do you recommend we say, look, either find another dev team or have them go to WebAIM and get the training? Is that where they would get that training?
That's one
place. They can go to what? Yeah.
Okay.
We've built some sites that we had an outsourced web team doing it, and we required it as part of it, but then when we audited it, we found out that they really didn't understand accessibility, so we had to actually do some educating as part of the project to get them through to the end with an accessible website. But I would just say, if you want to have it there, I would make it a requirement for future websites. Just it's a coding standard, and that's what you'd want to make sure that's part of your coding standards. Just like you say, I want it to be responsive. You also say, well, it has to be accessible.
So is that just having them go by the WCAG 2.1 AA then and just say, here, this is the requirements, or what do we
Well,
direct?
you wouldn't know. And I mean, they have to develop to those standards, but it also has to be tested by someone at the end manually using a screen reader and keyboard navigation to ensure that it's accessible. Because they could say, yeah, we've fixed everything, it passes the code, the scanners, but oftentimes you can't surface every issue until someone does use the site with a screen reader. So whether their team is trained to do that or you hire a firm to do that, you want to make sure that accessibility is a requirement for them to meet, and they also have to prove to you that it's accessible.
I wonder whether you could do something like have a page that's like a test page. So get a developer to do a test page that includes key elements. So a form, buttons, links, that kind of thing. And so before they develop a whole website, get them to show you that page and or to explain how it meets accessibility standards, because sometimes things are lost in translation, whereas if they can just show it on the one page, you would know pretty well straight away whether they understand or don't understand.
So what you can do is, for development teams that are still new to this, you can install the browser plugins so that as they're building their code, they can run that browser plugin locally, and that will tell them whether they have mistakes on the page. And a lot of the plugins now actually tell you how to fix that. What I'm thinking you're talking about, over time, as developers learn this practice and implement this, now they have what's called a code library, right? Where I can go pull this button and this button is accessible, or I can go pull this form field and it is accessible, right? So over time you develop that. But in order to get there, say you're starting here at 0 and you need them to get to 100. It's unattainable at this point. So what they need to do is little incremental steps, which the browser plugins are fantastic for that. That combined with WebAIM training and maybe any of the other companies, it's all any training is good, right? Any further knowledge of this would be a good thing. So we start with the browser plugins. They start to implement it into their build flow so that they know, okay, I always have to check this when I'm done. I have to fix any problems, so that when it gets into a test environment or a production environment, they know that most of their code has been tested. And there is no tool that will 100% call out every issue. Scanning tools, even the plugins, only get between 30 to 35% of the issues. There must be a plan to, at a minimum, manually do an assessment of your website, because that's the only way that you capture all the manual tool cannot go through, cannot test color contrast effectively. It cannot test whether you're tabbing through in the correct index. It can't do those things. So you need to have a knowledge of doing QA testing in addition to the desktop local testing. Does that answer your question?
Can I share
Yes,
a sample report? Barry,
Yeah,
I got
go
a
ahead.
sample report that I've got it in chat. I don't have my share on, but if you click on that, that's a sample report of a manual audit. And you'll see on there that it goes through all the stuff on, if you go to WCAG, this is a sample report that we cleaned up from a client. But
Hey, Teresa, you're going to have to change the permissions on that, because you're going to get a bunch of request access to it.
oh, it won't work?
I just asked for access.
I can bring it up and share my screen.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
go ahead, Mike. Sorry, guys.
Let's see, because
There we go. Because it's easier when you see it rather than talking, you know, and just about
So
it. But
this
this
really,
is like a
it's
report.
it's really a specialized QA function. So we're testing the site using the JAWS screen reader, and we've got sections. Each tab here represents a page that we audit, and so we go down through testing the screen reader. So, for example, we say, you know, what we're doing, who it affects. This is a summary of the issue that we're doing. So we want to, this is a skip link, enables them to skip navigation, go straight to the content. So we say these are the steps to reproduce the issue, and here's the result of the test. This is what we expected it to do. We prioritize by severity. We've worked with clients that while they want to get accessible, they have to work through, their dev team only has so much bandwidth to fix things. So we prioritize issues with keyboard nav being the number one thing to start with, and as well as contrast. But we've worked with sites that had so many issues they couldn't get through them in 6 months, so we had to prioritize. But at any rate, we always quote what guideline we were testing for then, and then put in a recommendation on how to fix it. So then after all this has been tested and provided as a list of really defects, then we've got this status column that can say if it's fixed, if we're in progress, not fixed. And when we retest it, if it works, we pass it. If not, we put comments in here for the developer. And so this becomes a really good tool to document all the issues. It also gives the client a list of these are the things we fixed. This is the level of detail we went to be compliant. So here's a section on keyboard navigation, contrast. We look at all these different issues. Can we zoom on this one or not? So this just a quick tour of that, but that's how we look at this, and it's, if anyone wants this as a template, we're certainly happy to share it.
And if I can add to this, the value in this is amazing. This is something you would definitely want to keep, because it shows anybody who potentially wants to sue you that we take this seriously. We're resolving these issues. Here's where we are with the issues. And if you keep them, say you have 4 assessments done, keep 4 separate versions of them. We did one assessment here, we did one here, we've resolved this, right? We take accessibility very seriously. Here's our plan going forward to fix these things. Something like this is critical.
You know,
Cool.
There's one other thing I'd like to mention, and that is companies need to have an accessibility policy on the website and also internally. So if there is an issue on the website of it not being compliant, there's a place for people to go lodge a complaint, and that will curb some of the lawsuits. And what it says is, you know, we're striving to be accessible, and you really need to be in doing that. But if we've missed something, or if you're having any issues, email this person. And with and there's stuff on WebAIM, and there's also stuff on WC3, but that will show you what a policy should be.
So awesome. Mike or Teresa, when you get a chance, you shared a couple docs with us. If you could get those to me and I'll put them in the place where they're shared to everybody, I can put them out to the group. That would be awesome.
And I would just add to that, please make sure that your legal counsel has read that and is in agreement with what you're posting, because they're the ones that have to defend it.
So just post them to the Facebook group, Barry.
Why don't you email them to me? Why don't you email them to me? Open them. So I requested access to both, and I'll probably make a copy anyways. So I'll probably share that one out. So just send it to me in email, and then I'll get it out to the group for everybody, because I got a bunch of resources here I'm going to share out too. So
great.
That's probably the best way to do it. do either of you have any developers, recommendations for developers that I know, Teresa, you guys are doing this stuff. Jeff, you're doing the corporate higher end stuff, but any resources there that you recommend?
In what respect, Barry? Are you talking
As
about?
far as developers that we could possibly hire if we need them, because a lot of us are on the marketing side of thing, and we sell these projects and have our developers build them, and I'm pushing my team to get accessible. I will be sending them all of this and say, this is a requirement to work with us. But obviously, if there's, maybe Teresa's team can handle all of us. But anyways, if you know of anybody, even now, or send it to me later, that we can reach out to that already does this, or even testing, that's the big thing, as a resource.
Yeah. Well, we don't, our team, we have developers who are accessibility developers. It's a different breed than just being a developer, of course.
Right.
I don't know any that we can look for some that refers, that would want a referral. The thing with the developer is just, even if you have a developer, we go back behind our developers and we re-audit always. We don't take a developer's word, no matter how experienced they are, just because things can be missed. And it only takes the one little button that didn't work, or this form that the developer missed, make inaccessible, to make the site inaccessible. That's all a person needs to find, is they couldn't fill out the form to buy something. So you're discriminating against them.
Right. Wow. This is mind-boggling, to be honest with you, for me. So Patty asked the question, so what is a definition of true accessibility? Some aspects seem subjective. For example, sites are mobile friendly, but some aren't great. User experience is off. We've all been on mobile sites that by now you think they would work real well, but they don't. So I don't know how you answer that question.
So I've not seen a 100% fully accessible website all the time. They are a work in progress. They are something that's going to continue to evolve. If your website is completely inaccessible, meaning it has keyboard traps, your fields aren't labeled, your links aren't set up properly, if your site is just not accessible at all, you are a huge target. The more you do to make your site accessible, the better. Again, as Teresa said, you want to get an assessment. You want to make sure that you keep that assessment current. If you're going to make changes, make sure you make those changes with accessibility in mind before you do the updates, right? Don't do it afterwards, because it can be up to 500 times more expensive. So I don't know about you, Teresa, but I've not seen any site that is 100% fully accessible at this point consistently.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about if it's subjective. Accessibility isn't subjective. It all goes by WCAG. It is very black and white.
Yeah.
It's in, if you look at it, it's a whole lot. But if it's in there, then it's required. If it's not, it's not required. And 2.1, like I said, it came out for mobile because mobile's so big now.
So there are levels of severity. Okay. So for instance, if the content is not keyword navigable at all, that's a critical, right? It's a stopper. You're literally stopping somebody who has a disability from using your site. If the image doesn't have the appropriate alt text, that may be a minimum. That may be a low blocker, right? That doesn't stop them from getting the information. It's just the alt text may not be correct. So we're talking about two different levels of severity. One completely stops somebody from using your digital content, and one isn't exactly perfect, but we can refine the alt text associated with that image. Does that make sense, Teresa? Does that sound about right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in no cases is it subjective. As Teresa's pointed out, WCAG 2.1 AA, very, very specific.
Yeah.
Okay, now W3C has things on their site for A, AA, and AAA. Is that overwritten by WCAG 2.1 then?
No, WCAG is part of it came from W3C.
Oh, okay.
They're the ones who actually wrote the standards.
Gotcha. So what's the AAA compared to AA? Is it just more intense, but it's not something that has to be met?
Well, it's something that we should aspire to, but most companies at this point, in fact, some of the technology actually can't meet it yet.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense.
But it is definitely something we should keep in mind as we're developing content, and try to aspire towards that.
Cool. So we probably have we usually go till 6 Eastern, which is probably about 7 minutes left. If anybody has some final questions or thoughts, it'd be awesome to hear those.
I'm wondering whether things like a headless CMS is something that makes compliance easier. Because there's some new platforms coming up that have got a headless CMS, and I don't know if you have any comment about that.
I don't.
I didn't hear.
There's some platforms now that are being used that are like a headless CMS, which means that the content and the context are separate, and the content can then be placed on any kind of device. And I'm wondering whether that makes accessibility building easier in a way. But that's probably just my own thought bubble, because that would be quite hard to answer, I think. Because I'm just getting my head around.
I'm not familiar with it either, but from the way you describe it, it sounds to me like you've got two different parts, right? You've got one that does the content and one that does the presentation, and one has to be in sync with the other. So to me, with what little I know about it, it sounds like it might actually be more complicated to a certain extent, because you have to make sure, let's say the content has an H1, an H2, and then text, right, and then a link. You have to make sure that that's how it presents itself in the other.
Across contexts.
Yes.
Yeah, because my understanding is that headless, you could actually pull out certain elements and present like the H1 title and some text, but not the header graphic or the content below it. And that might be bad too. I know we're running out of time here. There's some questions in here I think are very valid here. Penny says, what should we expect an assessment to cost? What's the average you guys to just do an assessment of the site to give us an idea? Because we may have sites that are fine, but we don't know it.
So one of my primary jobs is to write statements of work for companies within our company, okay, and different customers. So for our company, we typically look at about $115 an hour, and depending on the size of the page and the complexity, you figure about an hour to an hour and a half per page, depending on the assistive technology and browser technology you're going to use. So if you're going to use JAWS and IE, or JAWS and Chrome, or JAWS and NVDA, or Chrome and NVDA, or Firefox, right? Depending on how you're going to use that AT combo would depend on the cost. So we charge about $115 an hour. It's about an hour to an hour and a half for a page. The simpler pages are quicker. The more complex pages that are single page applications with different use cases, they could take about 2-3 hours per page.
Is there a minimum that you guys charge, Joe?
As far as doing the assessment?
Yeah.
No. We'll typically internally we do a sample testing, right? So if you have 50 pages and it's templatized, we may do 5 or 10 pages, right? Because the template goes across them, we get the most bang for the buck. So we go for like the first 5 to 10 pages to see how wide of a sampling we can get.
The sampling being unique pages, unique template pages.
Correct.
Yeah. If you get your template pages lined up, if you're a WordPress user, I'm not a BC user, but as a WordPress user, you can line up a template page and get it accessible. And then as you build on top of that page, the content as you put it in, just make sure that's accessible. And then you're starting to build your accessible website that way. And then you could just have it audited to make sure you didn't miss anything. You know, just that template. Like Jeff's saying, they do it by the page.
Cool. Patty asked a question about, do you have she has a fun website, web build checklist. I don't know why. Yeah, we need also the fun we can get. Is there like a checklist or a process, or is that just in the WCAG where we have to start, or is there some point just?
So this is what you and I talked about the other night, right? When I was in Minneapolis, I said, never come to me with a checklist. Never.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Sorry.
Well, and that's okay, because every website is somewhat different, right? That's like coming and saying, hey, how much would you charge to remediate a PDF? Show me the PDF, right? If it's all tables and scientific formulas and all these great things, it's going to be way more expensive than a straight text PDF. So again, it depends. But for PDFs, you could probably look to pay, depending on level of complexity, $9 to $10 per page. For websites, it depends on how many pages you're looking for. $3K for 15.
So so on the PDF thing, because we didn't get into that, we're getting close to the time here, and I want to keep people all night, but I have a client right now that, besides being business catalysts and we need to move them, they have over 270 PDFs on their website, because they're in, some are, I don't think any more than 3 pages, but they're instruction manuals for products, they're sales flyers for products, installation instructions. I don't have the bandwidth to fix all those. Are there companies out there that specifically are specialists where we could give them, here's all the PDFs, make them WCAG 2.1 compliant? I don't even know what that looks
like.
So
the basic process with documents, the first step is, are there any documents you don't need out there on the web?
Right.
You know,
yeah, you want to
don't clean it up first. Secondly, stop putting new ones out there that aren't accessible. And then to get a quote on PDFs, the way the companies work that remediate PDFs is they'll want to look at, some want to look at all the documents, some want to look at a sample, but generally PDFs are not all created equal. And I think Jeff was alluding to that. Some are scanned, some are produced with a good source document. Some might be fillable PDFs. A fillable PDF can run $60 a page to remediate. So it's all over the place, but $9 to $10 a page for a simple to moderately complex one is about what it's running in the marketplace right now.
Is that's to fix it, right?
Right. So they'll take all the documents up to a folder. This is the process, and then the remediation will happen. And then they'll provide them all back to you to replace all the documents you have.
Do you have any companies you can recommend for that? Because we didn't even discuss what that means in a PDF, what we actually need to do.
So
yeah, when we remediate PDFs, we work with a partner company, and we can either work with them on your behalf for like a management fee, or you can work directly with them. And so Teresa, you got the link you could drop in there for Schoolmasters?
Yeah, there's 2.
Yeah.
Let me give Common Look too.
Yep. They both run about the same price.
Yeah, Common Look is now. See, we have a scanner. We partnered with a company called Moncito, and Moncito has partnered with Common Look, and Common Look is one of the leading authorities in PDF remediation. The other one that I'm sorry, I can't type and talk. The other company that we have used, is it S-Mike or just?
think it's
There we go.
Schoolmasters.
I got it. The other company we have used, and the Schoolmasters, and the reason we do this, Mike has taken the course from WebAIM. I've taken the course from WebAIM. We can remediate PDFs. It's time intensive, and these companies have teams that can turn this around. If a company is going to continue to create PDFs that have to be put on the website, the biggest thing that we could recommend is taking the $125 course from WebAIM, because in your accessibility policy, you also have to name your written policy. You have to name how you're going to continue to keep your website accessible. And I wanted to comment real quick. I know it's almost 6. You talked about AA and AAA. What the person needs to go for is AA. AAA, you need sign language, somebody who can sign, all that kind of stuff. It's above what you need to be considered accessible. So we always shoot for AA.
Gotcha. So that's awesome. You guys have totally educated all of us today. And we could probably go another hour on this, but first, do you have any questions? You disappeared on me, so I hope you're still there.
I'm here. No questions.
Patty says we may need ADA training part 2. Well, we may do that down the road. But Jeff and Teresa and Mike, thank you very much for your time today, and just it's incredible. And thanks for everybody for.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks.
We're on. We're in your group, and then of course you can always email me or Mike. We're happy to help out. Some of these are fellow out of another group, so or developers, because we've sat there in your seat before. We understand. It's tough to understand all this all at one big chunk.
And I'm not in your group, but Pam is, so feel free to flood Pam with a lot of good emails, and I'll be happy to answer anything I can.
Yeah, and the Facebook group, post questions, and if you have a question for me, everybody knows how to get a hold of me and Urs, so you can send them directly to us too. So, time for dinner.
Nice seeing everybody. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.